Hey guys, this is Mikro back with another video. You guys wanted a PTR build tier list, so let's get right into it. This is partially based off this sample roster. I did change the muskets out after talking to more musket players because I don't think that's as good. The only other thing I would say is SNS is in a spot where you consider swapping it out for other roles, and this spear is most likely Ice Gauntlet, but I suspect that people will try to make it work with spear, and we'll see how that works. Both those weapons are really interesting because of weaken, and weaken is basically a must-have due to the nerfs to fortify. But the hard part about the weaken is being able to make it land on top of DPS players that are actually impactful, not just the players that are on the point, because the players that are on the point will no longer be the main source of damage. It's the players that are off the point that you're worried about, and that's the spot where you need to be able to land those weakens, and that's where Spear really comes into play, and why Spear is, I imagine, going to take over the meta along with Fire Staff. But the thing is you could ward to Fire Staff next patch, but you can't ward to Spear, because Spear is a melee, and shirking for it effectively doesn't really help you in most circumstances anymore. Fortify in general doesn't help you, so there's no way to like easily ward to melee damage. And because spear is thrust, and thrust is a non-typical warded stat, it's just inherently going to get a lot of value next patch, even though fire staff is the main strong weapon. So getting into that, this is what I have. The things that jump out right away, you look at the builds that are like basically broken and are the meta-defining ones. Fire Staff is a meta-defining build in both Ice Gauntlet and the Blunderbuss variant. I imagine the Blunderbuss variant will be a little bit more popular than the Ice Gauntlet variant, but both of them are very good, and these are both like equal in my eyes. It's just kind of a preference thing. SNS IG, SNS in general is like basically the best weapon next patch. Even though Fire Staff is like the most common slotted weapon, I think SNS is at a power level that is unfair compared to every other weapon due to its Fortify being that old 30%. So that really, really is going to make people feel tanky compared to everyone else that's in that meta. And the weekend, it got up to 20%. It's the only ability that has an AoE weekend that is that good besides Maelstrom, but that weekend is so much easier to land on a large degree of people than Maelstrom, so I don't see a lot slowing down SNS, and I think it's going to be a must-have in maybe even as multiples. I think it's very possible that you need to have one of these per gate, and people are going to try to run two on B gate because that is just such a powerful role next patch. The other big things is a lot of these alts got changed. Any alt and basically any build that was CC related got major nerfs and is not really as good as it used to be. Stoneform also is in a weird spot where it basically provides a debuff to you in most circumstances, assuming that you don't need the actual grit that comes with it, basically, the CC immunity. The CC immunity is the best part about Stoneform, and that's basically the only good part about Stoneform, because the Fortify in every build except for Heavy is going to act as a deterrent and is actually going to like penalize you for having that Fortify. So in general, Stoneform doesn't make a lot of sense, and it makes more sense to run something like a Bile variant. And I think a lot of these slots, like VG before, there is an interesting discussion that I've seen like floating around where it's like, is Scream even that strong next patch with how dominant anti CC effects are and how little like a counter to freedom there is? I think it still will be. I think people will just slot less freedom, but that's a discussion, and Bile will be something that's kind of thrown as a default for a lot of builds, I imagine, because there's not as much of a point of running Vines, since Vine's duration will usually be about a second of a route, and at that point, it's like barely impactful, and the Rend isn't as good because Rend got nerfed, and the weaken's the best part, but then it also stams you, so you're probably going to die when you go for it usually, unless you pre-plot cleanse, so it's like not a super good alt. So there's big changes in terms of alts. There's big changes in terms of what the best builds are. Uh, Great Axe Warhammer not that strong anymore. Still, it will be a staple because it's a good grouper build, but it's not a staple for the damage. It's because it has good utility, and other than its utility, I don't see it being a good weapon to slot in general next patch, which is reflected by this roster that I did a mock up before, where I think I only had like maybe 7 Great Axe Warhammers in here. Oh, 3, 5, 6, yeah, like 7 of the normal kind, and like 2 light ones that are using Kill Squad, so it's a lot less than typical. Getting into the Kill Squad, Spear Rapier, this is a build that can close distance very well. The main reason why Spear is also really good, besides the weaken, is because it has access to so many iframes. Spear itself, all of its dodges are reduced by 10 due to the 150 dex that everyone should be running. There's also a perk on that tree that will make them cost even less. So typically it would be about a 20 stam dodge and a medium spear, about a 30 stam dodge and a heavy spear, as long as you dodge backwards after you do an attack, which is very, very common. So you're basically not going to be able to run out of stam forever. Rapier also has inherent mechanics where if you dodge something, you gain stam. So this is just a build that can really, really pressure very, very well. Basically has unlimited stam, can chase healers very, very well, can get on those fire staffs, can annoy people, close that distance, dodge all their key abilities, and then just go for the kill. So that's why I think Spear Rapier is up there. Great Axe Warhammer is a build that can close distance very well, can do decent damage, although it did get nerfed basically across the board. I still think it can close distance, and this is the best build at closing the gap versus very squishy people that play far away, and Firestop players I imagine will be trying to go 50, 100 con, 150 con, not much more than that, and they will be susceptible to this build because you can't ward against it again because of the way that Shirking Fort is getting nerfed. Spear Hatchet's also really good at closing distance, really good at living. In some ways, the Hatchet change was a buff. If you play where you don't play for that extra life mechanic, and you just play it more as a passive Hatchet, then it is a buff. If you play super, super aggro and you use that extra 3 seconds to get out, it's a nerf. So it depends on your playstyle, but that's why Hatchet's up there with both these builds. It doesn't make a ton of sense for bows to go musket anymore. Musket, in general, seems like people are playing it like a shotgun, and at that point, it doesn't make sense to really use it. It does good damage, but you risk too much going for it. Hatchet is just a good way to live in general next patch. Seems a little bit better than Rapier overall for most builds, except for the builds that are super reliant on stamina. Like I think Rapier makes a little bit more sense because it helps you close the distance a bit better, but Hatchet's a really good alternative that people will try to run. Bow, very solid. The poison shot actually might be used next patch, which is a little bit weird just because there will be so many inherent debuffs that get flown out from range that people will be popping their coin spots a lot more often. And I imagine that will actually tend to not pad as much and will actually start to pressure people, which is a little bit different. Bow is mainly strong because Fire Staff is so strong that people are going to slap Elemental Aversion, and that will inherently make Bow more powerful. Great Sword Hatchet, just a solid build. I mean, you probably run it in medium. I don't think it's as strong as this current patch. Greatsword got nerfed. Hatchet uh got changed. I wouldn't say buffed or nerfed for this build. But it's not gonna really be able to close the distance and put the pressure on the fire stuffs as much, but it will be able to exist in those spots. I think it floats between an S and a low S and a high A tier for me. Spear Rapier I have on here again, and that's gonna get deleted. I did not mean to put that on there twice. Uh, okay. Um, Firestaff Voidblade, this is a build that's basically a prototype of a space control build. I imagine this would be typically run in medium or something with higher con. If people get in your space, you pull out the Voidblade. If people are not in your space, you use the Firestaff. I've seen it a little bit. Doesn't seem super strong compared to other Firestaff builds, but it's interesting nonetheless and deserves a spot on this list. Bow Greatsword's a kind of clumsy build. Doesn't seem awful, but I wouldn't say it seems like super, super excellent. Uh, it does pressure out people very well. You are able to play a bit of those rules at the same time. I think both spears in a very similar spot as this build, where it's like not bad, but I wouldn't say it's like going to be something that's meta defining or whatever. It's something to consider, but I wouldn't say it's something that I would go all out and trying to build before the patch actually happens. A Great Axe Blunderbuss is something I got talked about a bit. It's like a sort of a replacement for a Bruiser, but with the way that that build will inherently work, you kind of throw your damage and then you try to get a nuke off basically, and then you try to get out, which in my opinion plays more like a kill squad than it does as a Bruiser. I think this build is inherently bad next patch because everyone's going to be warding against fire with Elemental Aversion, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to get to that BB, even though that will be a probably better source than Great Axe, even with the going through Elemental Aversion just with the changes. Warhammer does not seem very strong with the freedom nerfs, which is the main reason why people are talking about that. Other builds on this list, I mean, IGBB, it's not that it's awful, it's just Fire Class completely outclasses it, so I don't know why you would try to play this build, in my opinion. It's decent at zone control. Before it was played with Mortal and Power, you tried to live, and then you would just kill people with mortars from range. Not really a thing that's going to happen on the next patch because Mortal Empowerment is utterly useless. SNS Hatchet's an interesting build. SNS is very good. This is a good marking build. Uh, Honestly, I would move that up to A tier, but It's just barely an A tier. It's not bad. It's just I think other builds do a little bit more than it, but the passive leadership that you can give to other people can be useful, and the weaken that you apply is also useful. Musket, just you can't really use it. BB Warhammer, you're not going to be able to get close enough for that to be effective. Void Blade will be good with Grit comes. Until Grit comes, I do not believe in Void Blade heavily. I've seen it. It seems like it just gets countered by most builds in the game. The Fortify that's present on that build does not really work out very well because it got nerfed. And it's a new kind of Fortify, not the old kind. In Ball, I think Spear IG is the inherently best Ball class because Great Axe Warhammer just doesn't do enough damage. The Spear, if you actually look at the skill builder, uh, has a lot of inherent damage bonuses that I don't think people are aware of, and that inherently just makes it a lot better on the next patch than the the Great Axe, because you're gonna be able to do more damage just immediately. This is more of a util setup that I was messing around with, but unending or unearning precision, that's an extra 20% damage. Exploited weakness is extra 30% damage. You have like 50% damage bonuses in your kit. You have a lot of really good passives that you have access to. A lot of really easy ways to get damage off, and you're gonna get CDR like crazy with this build no matter what you do. So very solid at chasing people. Seems like it will be played even though it doesn't make a ton of sense to put it in a ball group on paper. It's just Spear inherently outclasses most other weapons on the next patch, and I imagine it will get played mostly for this weekend because it will be able to counter people that are heavily going in. We'll be able to sweep people that are hard committing, and both of those are effective ways to deal with freedom because sweep navigates around freedom. I've talked about this a lot. I'll make a video on it at one point, but I think Spear is very, very strong and is runnable in light, medium, and heavy, which is very rare for next patch. There are not many other builds that can be run like that, or weapons. It is normally run with IG, I'd say, because of the inherent fire staff being present, and you want the cleanse. You could run it with Hatchet. I think it's better with IG. I have Hatchet on this list, but those are the two weapons I'd really consider it with, and I think IG tends to be a little bit better. Great Axe Warhammer is not awful. It's just not a carry role like it used to be, and it's more of an initiator. I still think it's a better build in heavy generally than medium next patch. You're just trying to kind of throw your grab, group people up, maybe land a stun if you're lucky, which will people walk out of before you can do your Warhammer light attack, which will be kind of funny. And you won't be able to combo it into anything, but you could pretend that you're doing something and you can force cooldowns a little bit. So it's a good space control build, but I wouldn't put it past more than that. I'd say Greatsword Hatchet is like very, very close to this build in terms of the utility it will provide on next patch on paper. I don't see this build being very good, and I imagine that a decent amount of people are going to quit the game over it, and a decent amount of people are going to adapt and try to find something else that works better because they'll get frustrated by how bad this feels. Also, if you have this gear and you spent like a mil plus on it, I am sorry, but your build is utterly useless for the entirety of Season 1 on paper right now with the Fortify changes. Uh, I've already talked about Greatsword Hatchet. Just it's solid. It's the same Kill Squad build, but the ball groups tend to be more Kill Squad esque next patch. They just need to be a little bit tankier. So it's a build that tends to slot, I think, better into the ball group than the Kill Squad build group in the next patch. Spear SNS, both these weapons are very, very solid. I don't know if they'll pair super well together, but I think someone will try and someone will figure it out and it will work. But it's something that I've yet to see a ton of success in, other than OPRs, where it seems to be kind of annoying. Uh, which most of these builds I've seen in other contexts and would believe in more on paper, but I think this is a kind of a dark horse build. Void Blade is interesting, but because the amount of CC effects against Grit kind of got changed, the amount of stagger effects got reduced, so Void Blade will get more value. If it had Grit with 300 con, this would immediately be an S tier build in my opinion, but without that, I have to put it a lot lower. I don't think it's gonna do very well versus all the other weapons that are present, but I'm going to be very happy if I'm proven wrong by that because that's a very fun build to play. BB Great Axe talked about that in a kill squad setup. If you're playing more like a ball setup and you're a little bit more tanky, I think it's even worse. I mean, it kind of sucks in both circumstances because people ward against it. Not something I would really consider going for. This is supposed to be Greatsword Warhammer. Greatsword Warhammer, not super consistent damage. The main benefit of doing this is you can avoid going to 300 con and you can go something like 300 int and then play for those heavy greatsword attacks. I don't think you're going to be able to live super well with this build, but it will be interesting, and I think someone will try it. SNS Warhammer should not be on this list in terms of ball, and I left that on there for some reason. If you're playing SNS Warhammer as a DPS spec, though, it would not be a bad build. It would be like between B and A. I just have yet to see it yet, so I'm not going to rate it. Support, Spear IG, solid. There's not much more to be said about it. It just applies a good amount of weekend. It applies Rens. Rens tend to be a little bit better than fortify next patch, but is generally useless. I don't want to go into that math here, but if you're interested in that math, head to the New World Database Discord, and there are a lot of people doing a lot of gross math that come up with a lot of cool results. So shout out to that Discord. But Spear IG, very useful. The IG is going to be able to help control that space. The Spear is going to be able to play in that space. Spear is a main hand, and IG is an offhand. Just inherently makes sense. Mostly playing for the weekend for this build, so you're going for something where you're trying to basically maximize the amount of crits that you're getting to get more dodges, and you're trying to land as many weekends as possible through Perforate and through Skewer. So those are the main things that you're playing for at that build, and just the weekend itself will make that very good. IGVG is interesting as a disease build. I don't think the Scream's actually that useful next patch, but I still think it's going to be run very, very similarly to what it was before. The main problem with Scream is people are going to inherently be able to get out of it because of freedom. The one thing to consider is this extra bone chilling voice is going to be a thing that kind of bypasses that freedom because it's something that gets added on after and it's not taken into account in the freedom calculation. So that's going to be interesting. I don't think Fortify Echo is generally worth running. I would look to run something like Mending Evasion, and then some people are imagine are going to cut Cleansing Harvest because this removes the debuff now versus giving you actual CDR, so it's a lot worse than it used to be. But some people think it's better. I think we'll wait and see. But if this is cut, then you're just going to go to Radiant Efficiency. If it's not cut, then you're going to go Cleansing Harvest. Either way, I think you're in a fine spot. But this is probably your tree for Void Gauntlet next Monday if you're going for a Scream build. There was another build I have on this list that's a little bit more experimental where you go for Tether. Tether actually has a lot of utility. Uh, I need to actually look up what the Tether perk is because it has the potential to be interesting. Oh, that's kind of interesting actually. Oh no, these are no, that's where's the craft mod? Well, I'll look at that in a bit. But Tether is interesting mostly for the weekend. This is it provides a weaken. It slows. I believe with the perk, that's what it does. It slows people, and you're going to be able to get a decent amount of CDR off of it. Uh, I think the Soul Eater is also like not bad. Like it doesn't seem as bad as I would have thought it was on paper. It's just something I don't know if it's good or not. So I think people will try it, and we'll see if it's actually good or not. But it's interesting nonetheless. If you play this, you have a similar utility to Spear, but it just tends to be a little bit worse. But providing a slow to people and getting a decent amount of healing off it isn't bad. I think it's a little bit worse than the Scream build still, but it's interesting and someone will try it and either we'll have success and we'll all swap to it, or we'll not have success and will be the funniest thing you've ever seen in OPR. So we'll see. I've rated that a little bit lower though. SNS Hatchet. SNS has a lot of util. Hatchet's really good at living. Uh, the main thing with Hatchet 2 is the actual infected throw might be better than Scream next patch. It applies a weekend and it applies a disease and it lingers. It sounds like it's better to me on paper. I just don't know where it fits. And I think SNS Hatchet's a way to fit it in and also have not bad damage. SNS also has a lot of util with the leadership that you could run, or you could run the other tree and go for the fortify, and then just basically help everyone in your army live a little bit better. Either way, it seems like it's not a bad build. I played it a little bit as a tank setup, not as a support setup, but I think it could be slottable as a support setup. BB Hatchet's similar. I'd honestly rate this a tier lower though. BB the Fortify is a debuff if you play it in light. It's also a debuff if you play it in medium as of current. If that gets changed, then this might change a little bit. But I think everyone's going to be warding against fire, and you're inherently not going to have a lot of damage if you play this as a support setup, and your util is minimal. You're mostly playing for the plague splitting grenades, but if people are already playing split, then those are kind of harder to land. But plague splitting grenades is probably the best source of AoE disease besides bile in a war, and it is a little bit better than bile. So not awful, but I wouldn't say it's great util. The main util from it is like the disease, as I said, and maybe the slow. But I think it's better as a tank than as a support as of current, and it's not very good as a solo DPS. Firestaff tends to be better. BBVG kind of similar problems. Hatchet tends to be a bit better. No, I'd move that back up a tier. BBVG does not really compare to BB Hatchet, and IGBB I don't think is necessarily viable like it used to be, just because your BB doesn't do enough alone to be a primary weapon anymore. In my opinion, I think it's better as a secondary. Unless you have a build like BB Hatchet, where both of them are like kind of secondaries but kind of primaries, and it's interesting spot. I talked about SNSIG a bit, but man, it's just that weapon is like tuned like it's old patch, and then you have so many passives that just if you actually look at how Fortify is calculated, which I don't want to go into in this video, then you will see why SNSIG is just inherently kind of broken. It basically makes it so all incoming damage is reduced to 70% before the actual damage reduction calculation that normally applies. So it's sort of like how compound interest works, where you're kind of making everything less, and then the other stuff's affecting it after that. It just inherently makes it so that you take so much less damage, and it's very, very good inherently in a ranged meta where Great Axe Warhammers are not able to break your stam. I can see this being run as a 3 of in a war potentially, maybe even more than that if people get really, really creative. But it's solid. It's just kind of a situation of like, where do you fit this in? And you're probably putting one at each gate, and you're considering putting two on B, is what I imagine will be the situation with that weapon. Great Axe Warhammer as a tank, I think, is a lot better than it is as a ball because it applies an AoE weaken with Maelstrom. The refreshing move might not be worth going for anymore, but Maelstrom is like a must-have on weapon next patch, and that's the main util of that class. It's going to make it so that it's a little bit harder to play on point, but it's not going to be as much value as before. Spear IG, again, you could weaken people on point, you could sweep people on point. This class just does not go away, man. Like you try it, and then you'll start believing on the PTR. But I don't know if there's many more OPRs on that patch. Even on live, if he plays Spear IG, you will kind of see how it starts to flow, and then you add on the weaken that it's going to get next patch, and it just kind of transforms into a different build. It's not like as broken as the meta-defining builds, but it's a build that can be run across the board just due to its inherent low cooldowns and high impact abilities that it has. The main weakness that it has is it's caught in long animations during those abilities sometimes, but you throw an elemental aversion, you don't really have to worry about the physical damage anymore, so you tech towards that ranged damage, and you just heavily counter anyone that takes a 1v1 with you, or even like a small scale with you, I think, because of all the weakens that you have, and that build is going to be really annoying to deal with and really frustrating to play against, I imagine. BBIG as a tank, I think, is a little bit better. You can kind of take advantage of that AoE disease a little bit more. You can live a little bit better because you're inherently more tanky, and that Fortify is no longer a debuff when you actually look at it as a tank perspective, but is basically minimally useful. So, not awful, but a lot worse than it used to be before. Still is good at outputting Bile Zone. I think Biles will be really good next patch. BBVG, similar spot where it's not bad. VG's significantly or it's significantly nerfed with basically disease or the root duration on screen being a lot less, and Oblivion's no longer generating constant stam. It's just a kind of passive boost to how fast your stam generates. So that's a big nerf, but it's still not a bad build, I think, and could be run. I just don't think it will be run a ton. Firestep IG is a weird concept of a tank build that I could see actually being played with some companies, but I imagine won't be played at the top echelon of play. The main idea behind this is you would spread smolder to people on the point, which people outside a point would detonate with their own abilities, which will make it so that everyone on point takes more damage to fire staffs because they're constantly at smolder cap. That's just a way to set up basically other fire staffs to OTK people, and it can be run in heavy and be fairly tanky, so it is like a meme build, but at the same time, it's like not really a meme if you're getting hit for like 3 to 4k per auto, and those autos are AoEs. So, uh, yeah, I mean, I would definitely try it. It sounds fun. It's just that I'm kind of scared if that's actually played because that's just like inherently just so stupid sounding. A great sword hatchet, not bad on point. I just think it's better as a ball group, but even though it's like usually run in medium, it will inherently have a lot of dodges and could be played as a pseudo tank on point. It also has an AoE weakened, was inherently in its kit, and Greatsword has the pull effect that is still present. Uh, from what do you call it, from Steadfast, which I imagine will be run over something like Relentless Rush offensively now because the brute on this is basically negligible. So you're mostly using Relentless Rush as a get out of jail free. Skyward isn't. It got basically everything with Greatsword got nerfed, but it still has some of the staggers that it had before, so I don't think it's awful. Going to healer, rapier, very, very good for pre-fight positioning. I think you can very easily get 3-2-1 by fire staffs next patch though, so be wary. Hatchet's actually really funny for healer because I think it got a really big buff. Basically, if someone's on you and you put a sacred on yourself and you pull out a hatchet, you're just gonna get full healed. And then they have to kill you again. So, and that's like only on a 60-second cooldown, so it's like kind of silly. I think it's very possible that someone tries to figure out a way to make that work. Also, the infected throw is just inherently a very, very good ability next patch, and I think is honestly better util than what Void Gauntlet normally provides. So someone will figure out a way to make that work. I think it will get played a bit, but Rapier is the main thing that healers default to, mostly over for comfort and for fast move maneuverability. But I think that fast maneuverability is like a lot less good when everyone's spread out and there's a lot more range damage coming in, and then Hatchet will be considered. Void Gauntlet will get considered because you need the heal. You probably need the AoEs next patch, so we'll see that a bit. Uh, Ice Gauntlet not bad, but it's mostly used versus melee. It's not as good versus other things. Greatsword and BB I don't think are heavily considered for next patch. I could also see like Greatsword as a tank being kind of played, but I think SNS just completely outclasses it as a pure tank, but as like a soft tank, I don't think it's bad. Like with the medium build, I don't think it's bad, but when you actually go like full heavy, hey, I'm just gonna block everything, it does not feel as good as Greatsword or as SNS does. I've already talked about ults a bit, but Bile is going to be like the main thing that's run next patch, I think. You'll just kind of throw it wherever, and then that clump is just going to get nuked by fire staffs. You want to, it will make it so that fire staffs are no longer padding, will inherently get a lot of damage. Firestorm's kind of interesting because it's a really easy way to animation cancel an ability. Also applies a weaken, which is noteworthy. It does not have like an animation that I'm aware of, so you will be able to keep your empowers and whatnot. So that's like a kind of a rare thing. Like even Bile gets rid of your empowers, but Firestorm does not. I think it will be run in some builds. We'll see it a bit. Detonate seems like it's okay. I think people will be spread out enough where Detonate won't get as much value as it used to, but it's still like a ability that people consider and run a lot. Cannon is just solid ranged pressure. Vines and Stoneform, I think it's going to get a lot less clumpy. They're not going to be as good. I think if people stack too much on point, they're just going to get blown up by fire staffs, honestly, next patch. With inherent debuffs that are present, it will be enough to overcome the passive fortify that they have, unless they are stacked on top of an SNS. And then there's ways to navigate around that potentially, but it's a little bit harder. If you're not running SNS next patch, though, then these other alts are like kind of interesting, but I think versus SNS it doesn't make a lot of sense. Ascent still needs a major weak work to be viable in PvE or PvP, but it's funny though, so I'll give it that. That's what I have for this time, guys. I didn't put in many C tier, F tier builds because I just haven't seen enough on the PTR to be like, hey, your build is shit. Because most people are just like, hey, I'm gonna play Fire Staff. Hey, I'm gonna play Spear. No one's really trying to make weird builds work yet. If I see some weird builds and they don't turn out well, then I'll start throwing them in C and F tier. But for now, I don't think there's that many except in kill squads where people try to have a little bit more fun. So, yeah, and I'll see you guys in the next one, and let me know what you think about what builds could be possible to be run that are other than on this list, because I put a composite of like what I've seen in OPRs, but there have not been as many OPRs as of recent and in that first PTR war and only PTR war. So, and I'll see you guys in the next video.